Hello everybody. Danky here once again with another punishing video from the wonderful intellectual masterminds of Prager University. I liked this title, Dangerous People Are Teaching Your Kids. Because I don't have kids, but I want to know who these dangerous people are. So let's look.
You may not realize it, but you are currently funding.
Who's speaking right now? Is this Kermit the Frog? Did they get the voice actor for Kermit the Frog to come do commentary for this video?
Some dangerous people. They are indoctrinating young minds throughout the West with their resentment-ridden ideology. They have made it their life's mission to undermine Western civilization itself, which they regard as corrupt, oppressive, and patriarchal.
Yes.
If you're a taxpayer or paying for your kid's liberal arts degree, you're underwriting this gang of nihilists.
You fucking kids in your liberal arts degrees, why don't you go into STEM, you freaking idiot, pussy, pansy liberals?
You're supporting ideologues who claim that all truth is subjective, that all sex differences are socially constructed, and that Western imperialism is the sole source of all third world problems.
Western imperialism is the source of all third world problems? I'm pretty sure that is a true statement. If they're not the source, then they're definitely like one of the main sources.
They are the postmodernists.
The postmodernists.
Pushing progressive activism at a college near you. They produce the mobs that violently shut down campus speakers.
The violent mobs. You guys remember all those violent mobs on the college campuses? I remember violent mobs.
The language police who enshrine into law use of fabricated gender pronouns.
Do you remember the language police? Any of you guys ever accidentally misgendered somebody and then a cop just comes up to you and says, "Excuse me, sir, you're under arrest because you misgendered that individual"? I mean, that happens all the time, you guys. Seriously, this is a real problem. This is a real issue.
And the deans whose livelihoods depend on madly rooting out discrimination, where little or none exists.
Oh, those darn
Their
deans.
thinking took hold in Western universities in the 60s and 70s, when the true believers of the radical left became the professors of today.
It's those dirty, dirty hippies. Those draft-dodging hippies. They are who's in charge today. Don't listen to college professors' kids. They're all hippies.
And now we rack up education-related debt, not so that our children learn to think critically, write clearly, or speak properly.
Yeah, because, in university, nobody learns how to do any of those things. Nobody knows. People go through university, and then they get out with a master's degree or a PhD, and they're like, damn, I sure wish I know how to speak properly. I sure wish I knew how to think critically.
But so they can model their mentor's destructive agenda. It's now possible to complete an English degree and never encounter Shakespeare. One of those dead white males whose works underlie our society of oppression.
Dead white males.
To understand and oppose the postmodernists, the ideas by which they orient themselves must be clearly identified. First,
can he? But here's my challenge to him: can he even define what postmodernism is? Because I don't think he knows.
Is their new unholy trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
The unholy... Let's examine the unholy trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So according to this Kermit the Frog sounding goon, diversity, equity, and inclusion are unholy. They're horrible. They're evil. Stay away from it. Diversity, ew. Inclusion, ew. I don't want to include people.
Diversity is defined not by opinion, but by race, ethnicity, or sexual identity. Equity is no longer the laudable goal of equality of opportunity, but the insistence on equality of outcome. And inclusion is the use of identity-based quotas to attain this misconceived state of equity.
Those darn
All
affirmative
the classic
action
rights of the West
policies
are to be considered secondary to these new values, Take, for example, freedom of speech, the very pillar of democracy. The postmodernists refuse to believe that people of goodwill can exchange ideas and reach consensus.
But see, Jordan Peterson and his ilk, they don't argue from a point of goodwill. They are just propagandists through and through. They're not interested in the battle of ideas. They're not interested in hearing about leftist voices. They want to silence all of that. That's why they're opposed to diversity. That's why they're opposed to inclusiveness, because they don't want those diverse uh, external voices shouting them down.
Their world is instead a Hobbesian nightmare of identity groups warring for power. Nightmare. They don't see ideas that run contrary to their ideology as simply incorrect. They see them as integral to the oppressive system they wish to supplant, and consider it a moral obligation.
I mean, I'm opposed to capitalism. I see capitalism as an oppressive system. I'm sure in the same exact fashion, he sees socialism as this oppressive, evil system. So, I mean, it goes both ways, Jordan Peterson. The left isn't the only one.
Obligation to stifle and constrain their expression. Second is rejection of the free market, of the very idea that free voluntary trading benefits everyone. They won't acknowledge that capitalism has lifted up hundreds of millions of people, so they can, for the first time in history, afford food, shelter, clothing, transportation, even entertainment and travel.
The reason why people can have access to all of those things isn't due necessarily to capitalism. It's due to the Industrial Revolution. The ability to manufacture commodities has grown exponentially since the Industrial Revolution. And capitalism, if you want to consider it by the means by which it allocates resources in a society, it's extremely uneven. Capitalism always allocates more resources towards the rich, wealthy elite, those who own the means of production, those who own the capital, and the vast majority of people are left poor and exploited by their capitalist masters. So you see Jordan Peterson doing some real bootlicking here, but yeah, it's real bootlicking shit.
Those classified as poor in the US and increasingly everywhere else are able to meet their basic needs. Meanwhile, in once prosperous Venezuela, until recent...
Once prosperous for who? The wealthy oil tycoons that made up a small percentage of the wealthy elite in Venezuela?
The poster child of the campus radicals. The middle class lines up for toilet paper. Third and finally are the politics of identity.
Lines up for toilet
Postmodernists don't believe in individuals. You're an exemplar of your race, sex, or sexual preference.
We don't say that we don't believe in the individual, but we say that on a societal level, we judge individuals based on their race, sexual preference, and gender, just on its most shallowest of levels. The base interactions you have with people every single day, the dynamics, whether conscious or subconscious, are all determined by a person's race, sexual preference, gender, by their appearance. So, you know, it's just more nonsense from the whole talking point. The left doesn't believe in the rights of the individual. They believe only in the collective. Well, you know, a collective, what is a collective but an assemblage of individuals? So
you're also either a victim or an oppressor. No wrong can be done by anyone in the former group, and no good by the latter. Such ideas of victimization do nothing but justify the use of power and engender intergroup conflict. All these concepts originated with Karl Marx, the 19th century German philosopher.
It didn't really originate with Karl Marx. There were communist thinkers before Karl Marx came along.
Marx viewed the world as a gigantic class struggle, the bourgeoisie against the proletariat.
The bourgeoisie.
The grasping rich against the desperate poor. But wherever his ideas were put into practice, in the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, to name just a few, whole economies failed and tens of millions were killed.
In a single generation, the Soviet Union went from being a backwards feudal economy that was pretty much marginalized in the rest of the world to being the industrial superpower of the world. They industrialized and raised the quality of living for millions of people in the USSR, improved education and literacy rates. Literacy rates in the USSR were near 100%. I mean, that's incredible. Education was free, employment, housing, all of these things, all of these benefits for the Soviet people. When you consider that just a generation prior to the Russian Revolution, they were living essentially in feudal conditions. So you want to talk about how capitalism elevated millions out of poverty. I mean, that's false, but we can talk about how socialist policy did indeed elevate millions out of poverty and educate them.
We fought a decades-long Cold War to stop the spread of those murderous notions.
They fought a decades-long Cold War for the sake of imperialism, for the sake of the capitalist masters. It had nothing to do with stopping the spread of ideas. It had everything to do with keeping the world order capitalistic by combating true socialist revolutionary movements wherever they propped up.
But they're back in the new guise of identity politics.
They're back.
The corrupt ideas of the postmodern neo-Marxists should be consigned to the dustbin of history.
The postmodern neo-Marxist, even though postmodernism and Marxism are not the same thing. Postmodernism rejects grand narratives of history, and Marxism, of course, has historical materialism as the basis of its philosophy.
Instead, we underwrite their continuance in the very institutions where the central ideas of the West should be transmitted across the generations. Unless we stop, postmodernism will do to America and the entire Western world what it's already done to its universities. I'm Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto.
I'm Jordan Peterson,
for
big
Prager
brain
University.
boy from Big Brain University.
Thank you for watching this video.
Shut up. That was horrible. Thank you guys for watching, but yeah, that was horrible.